The Galactic Council had overseen the peace and order of the galaxy for eons. Its members, representatives of the most advanced civilizations in the universe, wielded great influence over the stars. They had watched as countless species rose, fell, and evolved, always under the watchful eyes of the Council. Among the many laws upheld by the Council was the notion that advanced species must remain pacifist in their dealings with one another, avoiding war at all costs. It was a noble ideal, cultivated by millennia of peace and cooperation. However, it came with its own judgment. Species that feared war or fought too often were weak, unworthy of full membership. And then there was Earth. Humanity had recently achieved the rank of an observer species, allowed to sit in the Council's grand chamber, but not yet a full member. The humans had fought wars in their past, devastating ones. Yet, they had risen from the ashes of destruction, forming alliances, building empires, and seeking peace across their fractured world. They had not turned their back on war, but they had sought to understand it, to avoid it, to rise above it. The Galactic Council saw this as a weakness, a sign of fragility. And so, during the latest assembly, the Council issued its statement. In the vast hall of the Galactic Council, representatives from 1,000 worlds sat in their floating thrones, each speaking through a translator device. The space was breathtaking, an eternal void of stars, illuminated by floating holograms of galaxy maps and universal data streams. At the center of the room, a vast holographic sphere displayed Earth, the tiny blue dot representing the human species. Zarek, the viceroy of the Council and one of its most powerful voices, rose from his seat. His form was a being of pure energy, shimmering in shades of violet and blue. Humanity, he said, his voice echoing throughout the hall, has long demonstrated an ability to rise from the ashes of destruction. However, we must ask the question, does humanity truly understand the value of peace? Your species has fought wars for millennia, wars that have brought suffering to your own people and countless others. Your history is steeped in violence. How, then, can we trust that you will never fall into the same pattern again? The Council chamber fell into silence. All eyes turned to the human diplomat, sitting at the far end of the table. David Carter, the human representative, was a man of average build and appearance, short brown hair, dark eyes, and a face weathered by decades of dealing with politics. But there was something in his gaze that made him different from the others in the room. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't trembling under their judgment. He was ready for this. He stood slowly, his hands clenched into fists, his heart racing. He knew this moment would come. You speak of humanity's fear of war, Carter said, his voice calm at first, but the weight of every word carried something more. But you don't know us. You don't understand us. You don't understand the depths of what it means to be human. The holographic screen shifted as images of Earth's violent history flashed. World wars, the destruction of cities, the loss of life, the tragedies that had shaped the human race. Yes, Carter continued, his voice rising now, we have fought wars. We have made mistakes. We have destroyed ourselves more than once. But you know what you've missed? It wasn't fear that stopped us. It was rage. The room was quiet now. Carter's words hung in the air, sharp and heavy. He could feel the weight of the Council's gaze on him, but he was beyond caring. His words had a truth that burned inside of him, a truth forged through centuries of human suffering. We are not afraid of war, Carter said, his voice trembling with controlled fury. We fear what war does to us. We fear the destruction it brings to our families, our homes, our worlds. We fear the tears of children who never get to grow up, the cries of mothers burying their sons. We fear the scars it leaves on our souls. But fear? No, we do not fear war. We fear the consequences of it, and we rage against those consequences. A ripple of shock went through the Council. The aliens were not used to such open defiance. Zarek blinked in surprise, his form flickering with a mix of confusion and curiosity. Rage, Zarek repeated. Is this your response? To admit that humanity is driven by emotion? You call this strength? Carter's voice hardened. Yes, rage. Because rage is what drives us to never repeat our mistakes. Rage is what pushes us to do better, to evolve, to learn from the horrors of war. We rage against the violence. We rage against the loss. That is why we seek peace. Not because we're afraid, but because we know the cost. We know it better than any of you ever will. The human diplomat's words resonated through the chamber, each syllable like a thunderclap, shaking the foundation of the room. Carter paused, letting the silence stretch for a moment. How many of you have lost everything in a war? He asked. How many of you have watched your loved ones burn, seen the planets you once called home crumble to dust? How many of you have held a dying child in your arms, knowing you couldn't save them? We humans have been through hell. We've lost everything, and we've fought to survive. We rage not because we are weak, but because we are strong enough to face our pain and our guilt. And we rise. For a long moment, the council chamber was still. The only sound was the low hum of the energy fields surrounding the chamber. The other representatives from various worlds exchanged silent glances. Some of them were alien, beings of light or energy, while others were flesh and bone species. But all of them seemed taken aback by Carter's words. Finally, Zarek spoke again, though his tone had shifted from one of judgment to contemplation. Your passion is unexpected, he said, but your species is still untested. How can we be certain that humanity will not succumb to the same temptations as before? How do we know you can control this rage? Carter took a deep breath. The rage still burned in him, but now it was focused. Because we have learned, and because, when it matters most, we fight not for conquest, but for those who cannot fight for themselves. We fight for those who deserve peace. Zarek stared at the human diplomat, a long pause hanging between them. The silence seemed endless. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Zarek spoke again, his voice tinged with reluctant respect. You are not as weak as we thought, he said. Perhaps humanity does understand the cost of war after all. Carter's eyes softened slightly, but his voice remained firm. We don't fear war, but we will never forget its price. The Galactic Council did not immediately grant humanity full membership, but the decision was no longer clear-cut. The Vocarii and other council members took Carter's words to heart. Humanity's response, their unyielding refusal to let their past define them, left an impression on the galaxy's leaders. While the path to full membership would take time, one thing was certain. Humanity's rage was not a weakness. It was a fire that would burn to protect the galaxy from the horrors they had already endured. And that rage, tempered by wisdom and compassion, would make humanity a force to be reckoned with in the universe. For millennia, the Galactic Council had presided over the many species that populated the galaxy. Among its sacred tenets was a belief that only those civilizations who had achieved true peace could be trusted with the mantle of power. Their members were handpicked from the most advanced and enlightened societies, those who had transcended violence and embraced the virtues of peace, prosperity, and coexistence. But Earth, a young planet in the galactic order, had recently been granted observer status. Humanity had achieved remarkable scientific progress, but its history had been defined by violent wars, conflict, and suffering. The Council had long debated whether humanity was truly ready to be part of the greater galactic community, and their doubts had only deepened with time. At the latest meeting, a formal request from humanity to join the Council was put forth. The result was a verdict delivered with cold precision. Zarek, the Viceroy of the Council, stood and addressed the chamber with his usual calm authority. His form, a luminous figure of swirling energy, floated above his seat, his voice carrying throughout the vast council hall. Humanity has come before us with a request for full membership, Zarek began. We have examined their history, their countless wars, and their destructive tendencies. The history of Earth is a history of fear of chaos, a fear of war. We cannot trust a species that lives in constant fear of the very thing they seek to avoid. How can we, the Galactic Council. Trust them with the peace we've worked so hard to cultivate when their very existence is defined by their inability to move beyond violence. A murmur rippled through the chamber. There were nods of agreement from many of the other species in attendance, beings of light, energy, and ancient wisdom who had long overcome the need for conflict. Zarek's words rang out like an unspoken truth, painting humanity as weak, fragile, and incapable of true peace. The Council had made its decision, and it was clear humanity was not fit for full membership. At the far end of the chamber, seated in a simple chair before the colossal council table, sat David Carter, the human diplomat. He was a man in his early 50s, dressed in the standard diplomatic garb of Earth, a tailored black suit with the insignia of humanity on his lapel. His face was stoic, but his eyes betrayed a simmering fury. He had heard the verdict before in various forms, from countless alien representatives, but it had never cut so deeply as it did today. The entire history of humanity, the struggles, the pain, the sacrifices, the survival, everything he and his people had fought for, was being dismissed as fear and weakness. The words hit him hard, and yet something inside him snapped. This wasn't just an attack on humanity. It was an attack on every human who had ever lived, every soul that had persevered through wars, famine, and destruction. Carter's jaw tightened. He stood slowly, his body radiating a quiet intensity that demanded attention. The holographic light around him flickered, as if reacting to the growing energy in the room. "Excuse me, Viceroy," he said, his voice cold, controlled, but laced with undeniable rage. "I think you've misunderstood something vital about humanity." Zarek turned his head, intrigued but not yet moved. "And what exactly is that?" he asked, his tone condescending. Carter took a slow step forward. "You say humanity fears war. Let me make one thing perfectly clear," he began, his voice growing louder, more forceful. "We do not fear war. We fear what war does to us, what it does to the innocent, to the future, to the very heart of civilization. We have seen the destruction, the loss, the irreversible damage. We know better than anyone what war can do. And you," Carter pointed sharply at the entire council, "you think that makes us weak?" There was a ripple of surprise in the chamber as the human diplomat's anger began to burn through his composed exterior. The council members exchanged uneasy glances, unfamiliar with such emotion coming from a representative of a species they had already judged as incapable of true peace. "You say we fear war, but what we really fear is repeating the same mistakes. What we fear is the endless cycle of suffering. What we fear is that you," Carter's voice quivered with barely contained rage, "will never understand what it means to truly live through war." He paused for a moment, his eyes scanning the chamber, locking with the beings who had judged him and his people. His voice softened, but carried the weight of countless generations of human struggle. "We have fought wars. Yes, we have, and we have lost. But in our losses, we have learned. We have learned the true cost of war. We have learned that violence only breeds more violence, and that there is no true victory when innocents are slaughtered. We have learned that peace is not a gift. It is something we must fight for, something we must earn. And that is why we fear war. Not because we are weak, but because we are strong enough to remember what it takes to end it." The chamber fell into a profound silence. The members of the Galactic Council, beings who had never known the horrors of war in the same way humanity had, now stared at Carter with a mixture of surprise, discomfort, and perhaps a glimmer of recognition. For the first time, the Council saw humanity not as a species that feared conflict, but as a species that feared the destruction of its soul. Carter's words had pierced through their illusions of perfection, revealing that perhaps their approach to peace was missing something fundamental, a deep understanding of the cost of war. Carter, his face flushed with emotion, took a deep breath. His fury had not abated, but he had said what needed to be said. "We are not perfect. We have our flaws, our scars, and our sins. But we are not afraid of peace. We are afraid of repeating the same mistakes, of allowing the same horrors to occur again. We fear the destruction, of what we've built. Zarek, who had been the most vocal in questioning humanity's worthiness, now seemed unusually quiet. His form flickered in the soft light, contemplating Carter's words. For the first time, doubt crept into his ancient mind. "You speak of rage, Diplomat," Zarek finally said, his voice less certain than before. "But perhaps you are right. Perhaps you do not fear war as we thought. Perhaps it is the memory of war that drives you." Carter nodded slowly, his hands still clenched at his sides. "You say you value peace, Zarek. But peace isn't just the absence of war. It's the absence of the pain war leaves behind. The endless cycles of revenge. The hatred that festers. The lives forever scarred by violence. We've seen the aftermath. And we rage because we refuse to go back to that darkness." The Galactic Council had witnessed humanity's rage, and in that rage, they saw strength. It was not a destructive, mindless fury, but a force born of pain, experience, and an unwavering desire to prevent the past from repeating itself. Humanity was no longer seen as a species that feared war. They were seen as a species that would fight not for domination, but for survival, for the preservation of peace, and that, in the eyes of the Galactic Council, made them worthy of a seat at the table. Humanity had not won over the galaxy with technology, with military might, or with political cunning. They had won with truth, the truth of what it meant to be human. And perhaps that was the greatest weapon of all.